After more than 50 years, America just did something that hits different. On the 1st of April 2026, NASA launched Artemis II, the first crewed mission to fly toward the moon since the Apollo era, sending 4 astronauts into deep space on a mission that is about way more than just rockets, way more than just science, and honestly, way more than a cool headline. This is a test of American technology, American credibility, and America's ability to lead the next chapter of space exploration before China gets there first. But here is the part a lot of people are missing. This mission is not just about getting to the moon. It is about proving NASA can safely send humans beyond low Earth orbit again, operate in deep space, and bring them home alive, using the Orion spacecraft and Space Launch System. And the wild part? The biggest test of this mission may not be the launch at all, it may be what happens on the way back. So in this video, we are breaking down what launched, why it matters, who is on board, what the mission actually does, what could still go wrong, who got things right, who got things wrong, and why this one flight could shape the future of America's moon plans, Mars ambitions, and the global space race. NASA's Artemis II mission lifted off from Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 6:35 p.m. Eastern Time on the 1st of April 2026. The mission launched aboard the Space Launch System, or SLS, with the Orion spacecraft carrying 4 astronauts on an approximately 10-day mission around the moon and back to Earth. This is NASA's first crewed mission in the Artemis program and the first time astronauts have headed into deep space around the moon since Apollo 17 inches 1972. That gap matters. For decades, America stayed mostly in low Earth orbit, focusing on the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station. Artemis II is the moment NASA tries to reopen the road to the moon in a real, human way. And yes, there was tension right before launch. NASA extended a T-10 minute hold while engineers checked a sensor tied to the launch abort system battery. NASA said it appeared to be an instrumentation issue and not something that would affect flight, and the launch went ahead. That matters because even on a historic day, space travel still reminds everybody that this game is unforgiving. One small issue can change everything. For a lot of Americans, this mission hits on something bigger than NASA. It is about whether the United States still has the ability to do the hard stuff first. Artemis II is not a sightseeing trip. It is a dress rehearsal for future moon missions, especially the missions that NASA wants to use to establish a long-term human presence near and on the lunar surface. NASA says Artemis is meant to support scientific discovery, economic benefits, and preparation for future human missions to Mars. In plain English, this mission is a bridge between the old Apollo dream and a much bigger long-term strategy. There is also a national competition angle here. Reuters reported that Artemis II is a major US step toward returning humans to the lunar surface later this decade, with China also aiming for a crewed moon landing in the years ahead. So this mission is not only about inspiration, it is about geopolitical leadership, industrial capability, and who sets the tone for the next era of exploration. And there is a domestic impact too. NASA's moon program supports jobs, contractors, manufacturing, engineering, robotics, computing, communications, materials, science, and military-adjacent aerospace expertise across the United States. When NASA tests these systems, it is not happening in some vacuum. It ripples through US industry, universities, suppliers, and future tech development. NASA is openly framing Artemis as both a scientific and long-term economic effort. So yeah, this is a moon mission, but it is also a very American story. Ambition, pressure, money, risk, politics, pride, and a whole lot riding on whether the hardware actually performs. Now here is where a lot of viewers get confused. Artemis II is not a moon landing. The crew will not land on the lunar surface. This is a crewed test flight designed to prove that NASA's systems can safely take humans into deep space and bring them back. That includes the SLS rocket, the Orion capsule, life support systems, manual piloting, communications, navigation, recovery operations, and emergency procedures. The mission starts with Orion and its upper stage orbiting Earth twice to make sure everything is working while the crew is still relatively close to home. Then the astronauts perform a proximity operations demonstration, manually flying Orion around the detached upper stage to practice maneuvers they may need for future missions in lunar orbit. After that, Orion performs its translunar injection burn and heads out on a roughly 4-day trip toward the Moon. NASA says the crew will evaluate life support, navigation, communication, manual controls, radiation, shelter procedures, emergency operations, and science activities during the mission. Orion is expected to travel about 4,600 miles beyond the far side of the Moon, then use a free return trajectory that naturally swings the spacecraft back toward Earth, ending in a Pacific splashdown with US Navy support for recovery. That is a huge reason this mission matters. It is the systems test. If this mission struggles, the whole timeline after it gets messy. If this mission succeeds, NASA can move forward with a lot more confidence. Meet the 4 astronauts. This crew is a massive part of why the mission feels historic. NASA and the Canadian Space Agency did not just put 4 random names on this flight. Every single astronaut on Artemis II carries experience, symbolism, and pressure. 1. Reid Wiseman, Commander. Reid Wiseman is the commander of Artemis II. NASA describes him as a 7-year Navy veteran, a pilot, engineer, father, and Baltimore native. He was selected by NASA in 2009 and previously served as a flight engineer aboard the International Space Station in 2014. Spending 165 days in space and helping complete more than 300 scientific experiments. Why does that matter? Because command is not about hype, it is about calm under pressure. Wiseman brings military discipline, engineering knowledge, and prior long-duration spaceflight experience. He is the guy responsible for keeping the mission steady when the adrenaline is high and the margin for error gets real skinny. 2. Victor Glover, Pilot. Victor Glover is the pilot of Artemis II. NASA says he was selected as an astronaut in 2013 and previously served as the pilot of SpaceX Crew 1, then as a flight engineer aboard the International Space Station. He has multiple advanced degrees and participated in 4 spacewalks during his station mission. Glover is also making history. Major coverage of the launch notes that he is the first black astronaut headed into cislunar space on this mission. That is not just a footnote. It makes this mission feel like a bridge between old NASA and a more representative version of who gets to be part of America's next giant leap. 3. Christina Koch, Mission Specialist. Christina Koch is one of the mission specialists, and her resume is stacked. NASA says she was selected in 2013, served aboard the ISS during Expeditions 59, 60, and 61, set the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman at 328 days, and participated in the first all-female spacewalks. She is also making history on Artemis II as the first woman on a mission into cislunar space. For NASA and for public imagination, that is huge. Christina Koch is not on this mission as a symbolic passenger. She is there because she is one of the most battle-tested astronauts in the program. But the symbolism still lands hard. The road back to the Moon looks different from the Apollo era. 4. Jeremy Hansen, Mission Specialist. Jeremy Hansen represents the Canadian Space Agency and will become the first Canadian to venture to the Moon. The Canadian Space Agency says he is a fighter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, worked as Capcom in NASA Mission Control, and became the first Canadian to lead a NASA astronaut class. Artemis II is his first space assignment. That first flight pressure is real, but Hansen also brings years of training, international mission operations experience, and a broader partnership message. Artemis is not a solo US flex. It is a US-led international program, and Hansen's presence reinforces that point. Reuters also noted his pre-launch message, "We are going for all humanity." That line captures how NASA wants this mission to feel national pride, yes, but also global meaning. What makes this crew special is not just diversity headlines, it is the mix of backgrounds. You have a Navy veteran commander who has already lived through a long ISS mission. You have a test pilot and former crew, one pilot in Victor Glover, who has already flown a modern spacecraft and done spacewalks. You have Christina Koch, one of the most proven long-duration astronauts in the world. And then you have Jeremy Hansen, a highly trained military aviator and mission operations leader who now carries an entire nation's hopes on his first trip to space. That combination is not accidental. NASA needs a crew that can inspire the public, But more importantly, it needs a crew that can handle manual piloting, systems checks, long-duration confinement, decision-making under uncertainty, and the psychological pressure of becoming the first humans in generations to go that far from Earth. Now let's get real, because this is the part that separates a serious mission from a feel-good press release. Artemis II follows the uncrewed Artemis I mission, but NASA has already acknowledged that Artemis I revealed a heat shield issue. In late 2024, NASA said engineers had identified the cause of unexpected char loss on the Orion heat shield from Artemis I. NASA still decided the Artemis II heat shield could be used safely, but it also said it would modify the mission trajectory to limit time spent in the temperature range where the earlier problem occurred. That means the mission is historic, but it is not risk-free, not even close. Artemis II is also the first crewed flight of Orion and SLS together, and the first time Orion's human systems like life support and other crew equipment are being tested in deep space conditions. AP noted that those systems were not on Artemis I, which is one reason NASA waits about a day in Earth orbit before fully committing the crew to the trip out toward the Moon. There were also launch delays leading into April 2026. NASA's own frequently asked questions said the updated schedule was shaped by issues involving the Orion battery, the environmental control system, and the continuing heat shield review. That matters because when missions slip, costs rise, political patience gets tested, and critics start asking whether the architecture is too expensive and too slow. So, the honest answer is this: the launch was a win, but the mission is still a test. The real report card comes later. Let's handle this carefully and honestly. At this point, it would be misleading to say one person was the one who got it wrong. That is not how a mission like this works. The delays and technical concerns around Artemis II were not caused by one villain. They came from the reality of building a brand new deep space human system after decades without this kind of mission profile. NASA has specifically pointed to the heat shield issue discovered after Artemis I, plus Orion battery and environmental control system work, as reasons the schedule moved. So if there is blame, it is more about program complexity, schedule optimism, and the brutal difficulty of spaceflight than some cartoon-style screw-up. NASA and contractors built an incredibly ambitious vehicle stack, but ambitions at this level almost always run into engineering reality. Reuters described the mission as a decade-plus milestone and noted that SLS contractors like Boeing and Northrop Grumman were finally getting validation that the system was ready to carry humans. That wording tells you a lot. This thing took time, money, and pressure to get here. Who was right? The engineers who slowed things down instead of pretending problems did not exist. In spaceflight, late but alive beats fast and reckless every single time. A lot of viewers ask the obvious question: this is cool, but what does this do for me? Fair question. Inside the US, missions like Artemis help drive high-end manufacturing, aerospace jobs, STEM education, defense-adjacent innovation, robotics, navigation systems, materials, science, software, and communications. NASA is not just flying astronauts, it is funding an ecosystem. And because Artemis is intended as a long-term campaign, the mission affects future contracts, political support, and whether lawmakers and the public keep backing a Moon-to-Mars strategy. Globally, this launch sends a signal that America is not done leading in space. Reuters explicitly tied Artemis II to the US-China race to put humans on the Moon's south polar region. So even though most Americans are not waking up thinking about translunar injection burns, the broader issue is strategic. Who writes the rules, builds the infrastructure, and holds prestige in the next frontier?
There is also the soft power piece. Big missions inspire kids, shape public imagination, and remind the world what American capability looks like when it is focused. That may sound old school, but it still matters. Here is the roadmap. First, the crew stays relatively close to Earth, checks out Orion, and performs manual flight demonstrations. Then comes the translunar injection burn that sends them out toward the Moon. Over the following days, they continue system checks, emergency procedure practice, radiation shelter evaluation, science tasks, and observations of the Moon. They travel beyond the far side of the Moon, then swing back toward Earth on that free return path. Finally, Orion re-enters Earth's atmosphere and splashes down in the Pacific for recovery. If all goes well, this mission clears the way for the next major step in Artemis. NASA has said Artemis II paves the way for later lunar missions, and Reuters reported that NASA is targeting a future landing mission later in the decade, with Artemis IV linked to returning astronauts to the lunar surface near the South Pole. So this mission is not the finish line, it is the gatekeeper. Now here is the twist that should keep viewers locked in until the end. The most dramatic moment of Artemis II may not be the launch, it may be the return to Earth. Why? Because the Orion heat shield became one of the biggest concerns after Artemis I. NASA says it understands the issue and has adjusted the mission profile to safely manage the risk, but the re-entry will still be one of the most closely watched parts of the entire flight. In other words, getting to the moon is only half the flex. Getting home safely is the moment that tells NASA, Congress, critics, and the world whether this moon architecture is truly ready for the next step. That is the piece casual viewers may not realize. The launch makes the headlines. The re-entry may decide the future. So what happened on April 1, 2026? America launched its first crewed lunar mission in more than half a century. 4 astronauts, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, left Florida aboard Artemis II on a mission that is part engineering test, part geopolitical signal, part human story, and part national gut check. This mission matters because it is not just about touching old glory. It is about proving the US can still build, test, risk, adapt, and lead in deep space. It matters because the crew itself represents a new era. It matters because future moon missions depend on this one going right. And it matters because if Artemis II succeeds from launch to splashdown, NASA's path back to the moon gets a whole lot more real. But if serious issues show up, then all the nice speeches, patriotic visuals, and hype clips in the world will not be enough. The hard truth is simple. Space does not care about branding. It only cares whether the system works. And that, right there, is why Artemis II is one of the biggest stories in America right now. If you want clear, powerful breakdowns of the biggest US stories, from space, politics, security, technology, and the moments that actually shape America's future, hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story we are going to keep tracking all the way through splashdown. And tell me in the comments, is Artemis II the start of a new American space era? Or is the toughest part still ahead?